Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Near Alta, who build grain storage and handling equipment. You can find out more about them on their website at www.nearalta.com. That's www.neeralta.com. A big thanks to them for sponsoring the show and making this conversation possible.
Hey everybody, we've talked about Reformed education, we've talked about homeschooling, now we're talking about classical Christian education. Our two guests on the show today, first up we have Mr. Jesse Newton. Our second guest is Dr. Doug Sikkema. These two fellows came on, they shared their vision for what classical education is. We got into some nitty gritty about what might be missing in today's educational landscape, and we compared and contrasted against homeschooling and also Reformed education. I think this was a very fascinating episode. It was a great conversation. I learned a lot myself, and I hope you guys can be informed and inspired by it as well. So, without further ado, here is classical education. So, guys, thanks for coming here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
We're back with another Real Talk podcast, and so in the series of podcasts we've kind of done in education, we've done a few, and one we've done is on Reformed education. That was actually the first one we did, which is probably almost exactly 5 years ago, and that was with Jason Heemskirk. Principal over at Guido. And then we had another episode on homeschooling, probably going back like a year or two, and that got some really good feedback too as well in terms of just understanding what homeschooling was about and comparing that to Reformed education. But for having you gentlemen on, we want to learn a lot more about classical education, and particularly Christian classical education. So I think to start, can we just define a few terms? And you guys can give a little quick intro on who you are and whatnot, but define a few terms on what is classical education, what is Christian education, and then how does that compare to Reformed education? So a couple small questions, just throwing them your way. You guys can jump on. Doug, why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having us. And introduction to myself, I teach at Redeemer, and I've been with Oakhill since we started. So I'm the board chair currently. I've got about 2 more weeks left on the board.
Oh, wow.
So that time is wrapping up this month. But when you ask about classical, you can give like a 3-hour long answer to this.
And that's the podcast, folks.
Yeah. So the term classical just like basically comes from the classical age.
Yeah.
So the idea of classical education as a sort of distinctive form of education actually kind of was birthed in the Renaissance, which is sort of the rebirth of education with a fascination in going back to antiquity. We'd probably more call antiquity than the classical age.
Okay.
Which is sort of the Greco-Roman world, looking at Greek philosophy, Greek poetry, Roman rhetoric, Roman epic. But there was this belief with the kind of rebirth, the Renaissance, out of the Middle Ages, that there was a kind of lost, not just wisdom, but a lost form of learning that the ancients understood. So classical education, like in its purest form, was about studying Latin and Greek language. So you could sort of go back to the sources, like ad fontes, that term that you see in the Italian Renaissance and then later in the Northern Renaissance, was to get back to those sources. Now, a friend of ours, Susan Weisbauer, who's done a lot for homeschool education, she famously said, like, none of the classical movement today is classical.
Okay.
Most of the Christian classical movement is more like neoclassical.
Okay.
And I think what she means by that is that we're actually, like, our portrait of a graduate is not going to be somebody who's reading ancient texts in the original to kind of glean them for wisdom. Some of our graduates will learn Latin proficiently enough to do that, but that's not what we're necessarily after. So when we talk about classical, I think one of my favorite definitions, and I'm going to
You can cheat.
read it. I can cheat. This is from, David Hicks he wrote Norms and Nobility, which is this really beautiful kind of manifesto of classical education. And I just encourage anybody listening to this, listen to this whole thing. But if you can read David Hicks's Norms and Nobility, that's really helpful.
It was written in 1980, and it's a good read, a tough read.
It's a good, it's one of the, I think, more challenging reads in the classical movement. Okay. But he says this: classical education is a spirit of inquiry and a form of instruction concerned with the development of style through language and of conscience through myth. And when he did this really massive survey around like sort of the classical movement, what were its kind of distinctive features? he kind of gleaned this. It's not actually about content so much as a way of knowing.
Okay.
We'll maybe get into this in a few questions, but like the liberal arts tradition of the trivium and quadrivium were actually the art form of making you free by knowing how to learn. So that spirit of inquiry is actually at the heart of it. And then the other piece of this, there's a few others, but a focus on language. So the eloquence of style, learning how to think through your writing, through your speaking. Rhetoric is really key to it. And then the cultivation of your conscience of virtuous character through myth, through story.
Right.
So if you go back to the Greeks and the Romans, they had their epics.
Yeah.
The Christian synthesis with classical was the Bible is kind of the text, the myth, by which we learn how to live the good life.
Got it. Okay. So in the midst of all those myths, the Bible is the true myth in some sense, if that's not contradictory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And that's how that's how you get Christian, and that's how you get classical, and that's how they kind of come together.
Yeah. So the classical world, and again, it synthesizes with the Middle Ages. So you actually see, especially with like Augustine, through Boethius, through Dante, this kind of continuation of the classical learning. But again, classical learning was largely for the elites of society, mostly being trained in legal professions or in the ministry later on.
Yeah.
And then the Renaissance sort of recovers that in the kind of humanistic vein.
Right.
And actually many of the reformers were Renaissance men, right?
Yeah,
Deeply trained by Renaissance humanist scholarship, like Luther was, Calvin was.
Yeah.
And then it's fast forward to like the contemporary times. The classical movement that you and I probably know or we think of is born mostly in the 80s in the US, thanks to people like Doug Wilson, who read a Dorothy Sayers essay called The Lost Tools of Learning.
Yeah.
And that sort of shaped and inflected that movement as we know it. And so Oakhill is like a little offshoot in Canada out of that tradition.
All right. That's super cool.
Yeah.
That's quite the essay. I read that a few days ago, and I was like, oh, wow, this is very... Like,
the Dorothy
prescient.
Sayers one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's... Okay, so this just comes about basically like you just picking up what you said there in the 80s and get some steam in America, right?
Yeah.
So, and the goal of that is to find some of this lost, not so much content, but way of learning, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a fair assessment so far? A
think
lost
so.
way of learning? Is that what we're...
Yeah, and I think also like concerned with the right goals and means. Like I think I would say like first of all, like what is education? I would say it's not like job training. We're not just preparing you for like a job, although that's part of it, but a broader part. I say like education is like you're trying to pass on a way of life.
Yeah.
Right? That's like the word they had for that was paideia. And it's actually the Greek word that's used for both culture and education. It was everything surrounding. So we say like I'll talk with parents. I'll say like, look, a child's education doesn't begin in kindergarten. It begins when they're born, right? It doesn't begin when the bell rings at 8:30. It begins the night before when you're putting them to bed and you wake up the next morning. Like education, like we are as parents trying to pass on a way of life, and we're always trying to recover maybe lost ways or pass on the good things that our parents and our church pass on to us, and maybe there's some things that they weren't given but we've found or discovered or repicked up and trying to pass on. So I would say like first, like that's how I would just want us to think about education. And then to me, classical Christian education is, I think what's beautiful, what I really love about classical Christian education is it's trying to go back over like it's trying to get around all of the modern problems we have in education that's very like issue driven or agenda driven. Even the way we think about humans and people and learning and what should a school be, and goes back to more of a period where there was much more fruitful and holistic thinking about. So to me, that's what I think is really beautiful. And I think it's actually the categories I find in so-called classical education, just really trying to take the Bible seriously, what it says about people, about discipleship, about God and about life, and how how do we raise our children. And so, I think actually a beautiful picture of like the Christian classical tradition is like those monasteries, in the sense that like we can't really, I'm sure there's some things that weren't so great about them. I don't know too much, but you have like the classical non-Christian tradition that parts of it didn't view the body as good. For example, it had a low view of like manual labor, right? It had a high view of the mind and intellect and things like that. But then we know that as Christians, like God created the world and he made it good. Jesus was incarnate, and God took on flesh. So the body, and Christians wrestle with this, God's real physical world is good. So you see this married beautifully in the monastic tradition, in monasteries, where you have work, they're growing their vegetables, brewing their beer, building their houses, helping people like that are hurt. And they're also studying and praying and worshiping. Yep. And they viewed their study, their work, their learning, their prayer as like this ladder you climb on the way to holiness, on the way to God. And it's not like the rigor and discipline of the life wasn't like a form of legalism that we might think. It's actually like this is the work of reaching toward a fullness of Christ. But that's a good picture of like the work and the prayer and the study and the community and the friendship around good books and learning and dealing with sin and the weeds of life, and almost even resourcing the church that's more integrated into life and city. Mm-hmm.
It's almost beyond education in some ways. It's a bit more of a way of thinking, a way of life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. To me, that we're trying to pass on a way of life, and that's where we really look for like families that are aligned with like their goals are the same as our goals. We want to disciple our kids to know Christ, to do good in his broken and hurting world, and to just be aware of how did we get here today, 21st century? Yeah. What's the stories that have shaped us? What are the good things that we want to pass on to our kids so that they can live faithfully in the present?
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned neoclassical earlier. You also mentioned the influence of the humanist tradition in this way of education. So as Christians pursuing classical education, how do you parse that out, and what does that classical tradition look like today, perhaps, and how do you go about that, doing that in a wise and biblical way?
That's a really good question. I mean, that is one of the things that a long time ago in the school that I was part of, it was on the table to be a classical school, and that's because the school is a startup. Yep. And it got sort of stopped because of the kind of humanist tendencies of the classical movement. Yep. And then before I even met Jesse, and we might get into the story later on, so I won't spoil it, but I had asked a few people that I respected in education what they thought about classical, and the same thing. It's very humanist. So that was, again, one of the fears of it. I think I would say like the neoclassical, like Christian classical movement, the way it kind of addresses that is that Christianity is the truest form of humanism, right? I mean, we worship a God incarnate. Yeah. And I do think like Christ entered into humanity and became flesh to show us what a true humanity looks like. And I think as early as the early church, when they were wrestling with this great inheritance of the intellectual tradition, what should they do with it? Because a lot of the wisest people were pagans. Like they didn't believe, they didn't have the revelation, they didn't have grace. And there's different answers that obviously are given, right? To Tertullian's question, like what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? Some people famously said nothing, right? We just need the Bible, we have Christianity. But it's Augustine, one of several of the church fathers, who said, actually the pagans were glimpsing the truth, albeit incompletely. Yep. Right? So there's something, I think, in the best of the kind of humanist tradition, when it gets sort of baptized, that's maybe the wrong word, but when it gets kind of like, when the light of grace and revelation is cast on it, it doesn't show all of it as just like pure depravity and irrationality and foolishness. So a good example, like David Hicks again talks about in the classical education model, there's like this, he calls it the ideal type. So there's this figure that's almost like impossibly good that you're meant to imitate. So especially for young men, one of those types to the Greeks would be like Odysseus. Odysseus is someone you're meant to, he's brave, he's courageous, he's wise, he's cunning. He's violent when he needs to be, but he's also a husband and a farmer when he needs to be. So he's kind of held up in their epic, which is almost, again, their myth, to form the thoughts, the behaviors, the words of boys who would aspire to be like that. Right. For the Romans, it's Aeneas is one of the types, right? Christ as like the archetype, he shows that there's actually something in Aeneas that's quite noble, right? His piety, his reverence for the gods. When the Romans are honoring that, that's not necessarily wrong. Would the Greeks see in Odysseus as noble, and I think that's not necessarily wrong, but Christ is the fulfillment of that. Okay. So again, to the answer, I mean, Christians, I think, should be the best humanists because we've been given the best vision of humanity in the person of Christ.
Yeah. Engage in the tradition because it is worth it, and we have the truth at the end of the day. Yeah. 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 No, that's cool. Okay, so I guess we kind of had this later in the podcast, but honestly, this question is just percolating in my mind the whole time while you're talking. So this movement gets going again in the 80s. A lot of our schools here in southwestern Ontario, and I know there's listeners across Canada and some of the States and Australia as well, but there was a lot of effort, time, and money put into setting up these reform schools. And these reform schools have a particular model of education, and we've learned about that in the podcast before. So was there, in setting up some of those schools, was there a missing element? Did something just happen where we just took in the culture's form of education? You mentioned earlier about job training and that being the primary purpose of the school model. Is this a question of a poor choice of model, perhaps, if there's something missing? Or is there something else that has just been revived and there's a good place for either model, I guess? Mm-hmm. Jesse?
Yeah, it's a good question. Disclosure, I didn't grow up in any Christian school. I only came to know the Lord when I was 16 and went to public school. Yeah. So I think there's probably a couple of things. I think the first thing to say is my understanding of like public school in Ontario is that it used to be, we have a publicly funded school board and a separate school board, right? The Catholic school board. Mm-hmm. But it used to be actually, the public school board used to be a Protestant school board. They had a Protestant and a Catholic school board. It wasn't until the 60s or 70s when it was legislated differently, right? So I think that's a part of the story we have to remember that, at least in Ontario. I think even Ontario courts and things have admitted, and not that we have to argue this here, but that all education's fundamentally religious. There's values and choices and things that aren't like scientific, or you can't demonstrate those ways, right? So they all impart a set of values. I think with your question about reform schools, I wouldn't necessarily say they started off on the wrong foot. I don't know their stories, right? But I'd imagine that they're parents getting together, churches getting together, wanting to faithfully disciple their kids, pass on so they can know God's ways, and I guess also in particular in the Reformed tradition, ways of reading Scripture, knowing God, and serving the world. So I think that's all great. I think there's problems that come in though when we can just take what the Ontario Ministry of Education says, their curriculum guidance, because sometimes the way they cut the curriculum up is part of the problem. Okay. Helps you to see things separately, right? Like social studies is very different than history, for example. Yep. So I think that can be part of the problem where there's an over-reliance on a Ministry of Education that's been kind of changing things over time and not having your own vision, a biblically thought out vision and reason why you're educating. I also would say, like, from my talk with people, sometimes they're really intrigued, and I think sometimes they just haven't had the time, where I encourage them to take the time. Like, look, sometimes education can be really faddish, like where, STEM was a thing once upon a time and stuff, right? But there's been people and Christians thinking about this for 2,000 years. Like, there's a lot of, like, just open your horizon a little bit more beside the last 10 years or the most recent book on education, and just open up. You're already standing in the traditions, what I'd say. I would say there's just whole new rooms and people for you to talk with and about discipleship and what we should be learning. So that's probably how I'd interact with that question.
That's really good. I mean, unlike Jesse, I'm a product of those schools.
Yeah.
And I whenever I have this conversation, people are like, well, you turned out all right. And I'm like, well, you don't know me. So to Jesse's point, I really actually agree with that. I think any community, and I think I know this now as being part of a startup, kudos to you. Like, if you came together as parents and grandparents and a church and families to start up a school in any kind of environment, like just the work, the dedication, the fundraising, it takes a lot. Yep. And I actually say too, one of the things that I really appreciate about a lot of the Reformed communities and the schools that they've built is a really beautiful understanding of that paideia, right? That education is not just a responsibility of families, but it's families working together with churches,
Yeah.
right? Again, thinking about enculturation, passing on a way of life, a Christian way of life to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So if, like, again, I think if the classical school movement could have that kind of church backing of its community, it will take off even more. So to those early schools, and I'm thinking primarily that kind of post-war reformed migration that happened, especially in the Ontario context, a lot of them Dutch, but not all of them. But they kind of came out of a cultural context shaped by Kuyper that actually said schooling is the responsibility of the community. Mm-hmm. And they kind of transplanted a lot of those Kuyperian ideas into the Ontario landscape, which is wonderful. Nick Walterstorff wrote this book called Educating for Shalom. And it's a really interesting book because he said that first generation was so invested in Christian education. They did set up these schools, which is a remarkable feat of community effort. And then they put chapels into them. They had Christian teachers. They had really good policies. And he said the next wave of the Christian education movement is actually going to be less about the Christian content than it's going to be about pedagogy, which I thought was interesting. Like he was arguing this like in the 80s or 90s. So in some ways you could even say the classical move, and a lot of people that were in those reform schools are now helping start classical schools, is maybe just like another wave of that movement with a little bit of a finer tuning on, let's actually think about the form of learning. Because I went to those schools. I also taught in those schools for a few years. My biggest frustration was just a lack of cohesiveness and integration. So if you do teach like a history, if you love history, if you've been to the Ontario curriculum, you almost have no history in grade 9. You take the CHC2D, that's the kind of cartridge, that's what they call it. But it's basically Canadian history from the kind of modern age. And then you'll maybe take like a Western history after that. It's not terrible, but the kind of organization of the story of Western culture, where we are, when we are, how that connects to things like literature, the design of the kind of curriculum map actually excludes that from being possible. So when I caught wind of this classical movement, the thing that actually really struck me was just how with the grain of kind of human understanding it was, that there was an intentionality to the whole curriculum map that didn't see students as almost like brains on a stick, to use that kind of Jamie Smith language, or like we can actually give you this kind of cartridge of knowledge here, wait 3 years, give you this cartridge of knowledge, and you kind of have to integrate it yourself. If you have a really good teacher, they might help you integrate it. But the design, actually, I never saw it until I saw a classical school in Texas for the first time. I was like, oh wow, that's possible. So,
and it's like the thing that sets the classical apart then is that continuation of like the story is really connected all the way throughout education. You felt like it was stunted in these, you referenced these cartridges there.
Yeah, well, one of the taglines of classical is like history is the spine. So we'll go through the kind of the cycle of history 3 times over the course of your JK to 12 year.
Which that's the trivium, right? Or no? Not
quite. Well, the trivium is the grammar, logic, rhetoric. So you can do it. So you're, in the Dorothy Sayers sense, yes. So there's like a kind of a grammar stage of that history, and then a logic, like it's a little bit deeper, and then rhetoric. So to that end, it would be. There's just kind of different definitions, I guess.
But bear with me. I am the noob asking the questions here, so I'm here to learn.
There's a lot of jargon in neoclassical, right? So
It's
like technical language, I guess.
Okay. But there's obviously a hunger for this style of education, as you guys have seen at Oakhill, right? So do you want to just share a little bit about how Oakhill got off the ground and what kind of led to that becoming a thing?
The first time I heard of classical was I have a twin brother. He lived in Texas. He was doing a school.
They look the same, by the way.
Oh, really?
We're identical,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So he was teaching at Live Oak, which is a school that had just started up in Waco, Texas, of Chip and Joe fame. And he was teaching grade 4. And that's the first time I saw that history curriculum, that model. And then when I came back to Hamilton, which is where my wife and I were kind of settling down, I talked to one of my colleagues. I was working at a think tank and working on my PhD at the time. I said, hey, we should start a classical school. His kids were young. My kids were very young. And we're like, this is, no, it's way too much time.
Bit of work.
So fast forward a few years, our kids had just enrolled in the local Christian school. It was a really great school. They were having a wonderful time. And then a friend of mine said, do you know who Jesse Newton is? There's this like invite going around for people who are interested in a classical Christian school to come to, where was it? Hamilton, yeah. But I think we're meeting in Stony Creek or something like that.
Yeah, we met in Stony Creek.
Yeah, Project Oak Tree or something it was called.
Sounds almost military.
Yeah, it felt like top secret. And then it was, I remember going, there was Dennis Doty, who was at the time the head of the Westminster Classical School, and Jesse was there, and Jesse was carrying like this satchel filled with books. And throughout the course of the morning, he would just like pull out and start quoting Milton or pull out. And then immediately I was like, this is my kind of guy. This is great. And after that morning, it really kind of, just like I was like, I want to be part of this. So we started meeting with Jesse at his house and a bunch of people, and started a board out of this like kind of first startup group. Yep. And it was pretty precarious, but some of the advice we got early on was just start it. Start it small, start it however you can, get it going, and something really small will grow. And the first year there's like 15 students plus 3 full-time, I think 18.
18 students and then a couple teachers.
Yeah. And then fast forward to year 7 and it's taken off. Yeah, there's I think over 200 students enrolled right now.
That's awesome.
That's a really like quick version.
Yeah, no.
I'll let Jesse fill in a lot of the gaps that I left.
No, he did a great job. From my view, like I was, our oldest daughter was coming of school age, and I usually ask questions like, "Oh, what kind of school should they go to?" My own background, came to know Christ in a Pentecostal church, worship with in a Baptist church now, but we typically we have like more of an evangelistic bent, like, oh, let's be a witness in the public schools and things like that. And then I got thinking about my own gaps in learning, and there's I had some great teachers, and sometimes history would come into the math room or science room, and or just teachers that make things come alive. But sometimes I was always feeling there's something missing. Anyways, when we were looking at what a school could be, we stumbled into classical Christian education, kind of like Lucy stumbles into the wardrobe and finds herself talking to a fawn and snow falling in her head. And it was great. And I was like, wow, this is like a whole new world. All the things I'm trying to put together, like really, I guess, a tradition in my own head. And then I kind of fall into it. And I'm like, this is awesome. I felt like the ugly duckling had found its pond. And then we said, well, and then Dennis Doty, the principal at Westminster Classical Christian School in Toronto at the time, he sent me a message because we were visiting him, and he goes, Jesse, we keep getting these Hamilton visitors coming to our school in Toronto. Why don't you put a meeting together and we'll see what we can get going. So we did. We had a bunch of people out. That's where I first met Doug and a number of other families that are still at Oakhill. And that was June 2017. So then fast forward September 2018, we started. And I was working as an engineer at the time, and then I kind of threw my name into the hat for the principal, and here we are. And so left my engineering kind of world and job, and it's kind of just like you almost like pushing like this car off like down a hill, like just over the crest.
Say off a cliff.
And then it keeps going. Like I feel like that it just hasn't stopped going, and it's beautiful. It's great. And since then, so many more families and teachers and grandparents and people have just put their hand to the plow with us. And are doing so many beautiful things that we couldn't have done or were thinking of, and it's a beautiful community.
That's a good metaphor of the pushing the I think of it even like climbing a mountain.
Or snowball,
like
but
one step at a time. But then you look back, you're like, how did we get so we're up here? And it's
momentum, and the blessing of God. That's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
That's awesome, guys. So where do the students come from in terms of like, are they at public school? Are they at other Christian schools? What are some common themes you're hearing from parents who are like, oh yeah, I would love to send my kids to this school. We've been missing X.
Yeah, they kind of come from everywhere. Like our own kids weren't in school. I think your students were going to another school. Some were on a wait list for another school. That was the beginning. Today they're coming from homeschool. So there's some homeschooling families really want a classical or Charlotte Mason, and they'll homeschool because they don't have any options. Now Oakhill's an option for them, so that's one draw. Some don't like what's really going on in the public schools, so they were there, and then they get thinking more about it and thoughtful, and like, wow, there's just a big difference between school and my home. So then Oakhill is one place that they land. Some are actually to start to look for a classical. They heard about it, classical Christian school. sometimes they're relocating from around the country or whatnot, and then they'll choose Hamilton because we're here. We got to know them. That's happened a few times. So
we had somebody who left Vancouver to move to Hamilton to go to Oakhill.
Wow.
Which was like year 2 or 3. It was pretty remarkable.
Another family just from Nova Scotia. There's been a few, but they're in the midst of transition, and then they want to land somewhere with a good church and a school.
Yeah.
And then so Oakhill's been like, there for them. So
that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah. So they kind of coming from, and sometimes they're just also fed up with school with some of the ideology in there, or it's agenda driven. It's not really deep content, or
even the tech habits.
That's the next thing to say. Yeah, like we're low tech school on purpose, not just because we're poor.
Not only.
So it's I think it's a big part of that too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, let's touch on the tech thing for a minute, because I noticed that the word restful was like all over you guys' website in terms of how you're trying to create this restful atmosphere. So how do you and maybe balance is the wrong word to use too, but how do you balance obviously keeping kids informed and somewhat up to date about current technologies and how to use them? Maybe that's not the school's place to teach. To be fair, that could just be an assumption in my question. But how do you balance that and then also create a restful atmosphere where they can still get lots of book learning done, traditional learning? How do you guys go about that? Do you have certain rules or principles that way, or how does that manifest?
Yeah, when we say low tech, like we mean like it's like no screen tech. So there's no computer class, no computer lab, no iPads. So, on like rare occasions, teacher will use like a video to show something that you can't learn or that's important to what they're doing. So, but they're very kind of they're exceptions. Yeah, we think like the way I think about it is like there's like 1,000 hours in a school year, like when you're actually in class. The time is so precious.
Yep.
And there's so many things we want to study and learn. So we try to put in our schedule and our curriculum things that are really tough to replicate at home. I think a keyboarding class is kind of easy to learn, right?
Yep.
Nature study, art, like music, writing, speaking, like those things are harder to kind of teach. So that's one way that we look at it. And then I think also we're a school. We want students to learn, and we're teaching them to think. And so often the way we use at least screen technology is it actually distracts and detracts from learning, from good brain formation, mind formation. So I think it's like a tool, like pencils, it was a technology at one time, a codex, a book was a technology. So like we're low screen tech, but I think because we're trying to teach people how to think and teaching them like forming their loves and a culture of friends. And then we will figure out, that technology is, home's a good place to learn at it. We're actually thinking, we're still building our high school. So we're wondering about the grade 12 year of integrating like a laptop with them or something like that. So they launch into, post-secondary. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say just like in addition to that, I mean, in my like day job working with university students, it is amazing actually how much the tools that we shape us and how many students get to university and they've like cultivated like such a fragmented attention span.
Oh, it's brutal.
Right. And we're all talking about this across the sector, right? Like what do we do with like kids aren't reading anymore? And we're coming to the realization that students not only just don't want to read, it's some of them are actually functionally unable to read because of the rewiring of the brain.
Totally.
So to sustain your attention across more than 3 pages without going to the like the dopamine dispensing machine that you have in your pocket is actually, it's a huge problem.
Yep.
So I think to Jesse's point, one of the resources of the human faculties we actually didn't quite know you could take for granted is attention. And the attention is like such an integral part of being a human, and I'd say being a Christian.
Yep.
And if you can have a school that's dedicated to, again, a humanistic enterprise, a Christian humanistic enterprise, then you have to cultivate that faculty well.
Yeah.
So, and to, again, what Jesse said, so writing, reading, thinking, we're not afraid of technology, but it's, the term I like is tech wise.
Yep.
It's an Andy Crouch term, right? But so use those tools that can best actually enhance that. And almost all the studies and the data are actually moving in the direction of saying that this kind of Luddite approach to tech is actually the way that the sector is going to start moving. Like
it's smarter.
There's all kinds of bans now on phones and social media and stuff
Yep.
in the UK and in the US.
Yep.
So I'm glad to actually see there's pressure from up top happening.
Yep.
But to Jonathan Haidt's kind of argument in the anxious generation, it's got to actually start at the ground level in the community. And I do think the school is actually one of these places where you can kind of cultivate that, like that kind of form of life. So
Totally. I mean, yeah, as a 26-year-old, a product of this age of growing up in the smartphone time, like I cannot tell you how hard it is to build an attention span and to stay away from all the distractions. Like, I think if you can keep that stuff out of school as long as possible, like it's so helpful, because it's very easy to use it outside of school. But if you're going to school and you have a place where like you're not going to have to be faced with that choice to, you know, beep, it's right there. Yeah. You can just learn. Like, I can totally see why people go for that. And that's,
you got to read a book called The Tech Exit. It's
Okay.
actually really good. So it's by someone who works for Ethics and Public Policy Center in DC.
all right.
But again, her argument too is for kids. Like, why do
Yeah.
we don't say to kids like have broccoli in moderation?
Yeah.
So why do we say with screens as we're going to control screen time?
Yeah.
It's like maybe the thing we're giving them is not like sugar. It's a kind of drug.
It's crack.
Yeah.
Totally.
So it's like the only actually the best option for them is just pull them out of it.
Well, it's not hard to learn. This is the other like, I know I asked the
Yeah.
question just to get the discussion going, but like
Yeah.
it's not hard to learn technology. They make it very, very intuitive. So like if your kids come out of a school and they're not technologically inclined, so to speak, you can pick that up very quickly.
Well, and to be honest, this is the argument that I keep having too, is the rate at which technology is changing.
Well, that too.
Is by the time you've even got them used to certain tools, they're obsolete.
Yeah.
So I think it's a losing game,
Yeah.
and I think you mentioned this earlier. We're not actually after job training.
Yeah.
So, but if you can actually think, read, focus, work,
Yeah.
do all those kinds of things, and you have a virtuous character, that can get plugged into any kind of community and context.
Totally.
And the on-the-job training skills, some of them which will be tech heavy,
Yeah.
you can adapt to that.
Figure it out as you go. You just need the principles to use.
You said you're
them.
26?
Yeah.
When did you get a phone?
Probably 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, 16. But I would have had an iPod maybe 2 years before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Yeah.
That's
No,
not too bad,
I have to
actually.
give my parents credit for always harping on the screen time thing, but
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
yeah. Shout out, mom and dad. Thank you. I know. Yeah, you come around to it later and you're like, wow, yeah, that's a good thing they did that. It's
But the thing is too, it's like, and that's where I feel like adults have to be adults.
Totally.
And there's things that it's going to be uncomfortable, and,
Yeah.
and sometimes going against the status quo is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you have a vision of the good life you want for them, because I think tech-wise has to also be accompanied by, we're not just against all these things, we're for the kind of life we want you to live.
Yeah, there's
and that's
other
where
ways.
like getting out into nature, doing real things, doing that. And when you see like there's like a deeper joy that attends that,
Oh yeah,
then all of a sudden you're like, well, why am I going to go like eat the mud pie when there's a feast?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's like getting kids to see that the little endless scrolling, that kind of nihilistic activity
oh yeah,
doesn't actually bring you joy.
Yeah.
Right. It really doesn't. And I've seen it all the time across first year university students
oh yeah,
where they want an escape hatch from that.
definitely. I mean, I was on a plane late last week, and you sit down, and if you just relax, and you just sit there and you just look at it, what other people are doing, just the whole plane is just thumbs, just scroll. I'm like, it's depressing. It's just a whole row of screens. Like,
Can I tell you a quick story?
absolutely. That's what podcasts
So
are for.
just before the year before Oakhill started, another life, I was a camp director or a program director at camp. So I helped at Ontario Pioneer Camps, program director LIT program. So we had like 60, 80, 15, 16-year-old students.
Yeah.
So the policy, it was like 3 weeks. The policy was you have to check in your phone. You have to put in a Ziploc bag. You can get it for half an hour once a week, and you have to come and ask for it. Otherwise, there's no phones. So they would complain so much, these students, right?
Yeah.
But then at the end, I was walking back from like a program area with a couple of like nice girls, maybe like we consider like a cool or like girls if you want to use that. But she said to me, she goes, "Oh, I'm so sad. Like this is anytime." I'm like, "Oh, what's like?" She said, "I don't want to get my phone back." I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "That." I was so surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Why?" She goes, "Well, I don't use a lot of media, but she's like, well, there's so much pressure to keep up
Oh yeah.
on media with posts and status and people liking you." And then she goes, "And if we had our phones, we probably wouldn't become friends. Like we had to learn to talk to each other at the table."
Yep.
And so anyways, it's just like a little picture of like people will whine and kick and scream. But it just requires like the Lord for that camp. They just had the vision, like no phones.
Yeah.
And to cultivate the kind of friendship and community. So I think, we need to kind of build our own convictions here and just lead best we can wherever we are.
Yep. No, I think you guys are bang on that. It's so important. Going back earlier, I was asking about where do your students kind of come from, and just thinking in the context of the reform schools that I grew up in, that you grew up in, Doug. They have this covenantal model of education, right? And there's a very close tie with the church as well. And there's a lot of leaning on the church to do the work of the church in terms of taking care of the membership and keeping an eye on things and whatnot. So with you guys pulling from different traditions and backgrounds, how did you guys work to craft a statement of faith and values? And what do you expect of parents who send their kids to Oakhill?
That's a great question.
It's not a loaded question at all.
No. We were very intentional in the beginning about we weren't a church school, not a denomination.
Yep.
We were a bunch of families coming from different places that wanted this kind of education for our kids. And we said, okay, well, we definitely need a confession of faith, and we have also an affirmation of core family values, which is just what we believe about marriage, gender, when life begins and ends, stuff like that.
Yep.
So we crafted that out, and it was good. Our confession is a broad Protestant confession, so it doesn't take it's probably broader. Yeah, it's broader than like maybe a typical Reformed church, but it is like Reformed with a small R.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been good. We thought it was important because just to let people know who we are and be certain about who we are ourselves. And then also, I've heard from a lot of families who grew up in like Christian schooling, very grateful for it, Reformed Christian schooling. And one thing that they've said to me, I've heard a lot, is that sometimes they felt like their communities were very
insular, or
right, or just their church friends and the school friends were always the same. They didn't really interact with other Christians outside of that. And it's a beautiful gift, I think, in one sense. In the other sense, they said they just wanted to get their family to have a broader view of who the Christians are in their city.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things that they come to our school as well, is they like that it's broad. Let's like an ecumenical Protestant confession, and we're here for a vision, and actually it's helpful too when we have in some of our older students debating about in baptism, should it be believers baptism or infant baptism, and different aspects. So it also helps them to know their own tradition, and then other, I would say, faithful, biblical traditions as well. It's good. I think it actually is it's another way of getting of educating, discipling your kids, I think.
Cool. On the homeschooling front, you mentioned that earlier. You had some people who liked homeschooling because they wanted to be able to give their kids this classical type of education, but now they've found a home at Oakhill. Why would homeschool families make that shift, and what's kind of brought some of those folks over to your school?
I can't speak for homeschool parents, but I imagine just like teaching your kids. COVID gave us a little window into like homeschool. Yeah. So I think for some of them, the ones I know, it's like that's just hard. As your kids get older. So it's you kind of reach a certain kind of limit, and you're like, well, if I don't want to be doing like online schooling or so much independent learning, Oakhill is doing something beautiful that I can't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I also do think that Oakhill, because we have pretty small class sizes, we're about 21 students per class, there's a kind of human scaled attention that they can get at Oakhill that they really like. And then I think whether you're homeschool or not, the idea that home school is the extension of your home is a beautiful principle that I know even Reformed schools talk about that, right? But I know even for my wife and I would say like Oakhill is not just an extension of my home. It's like the home I want to create for my kids. Like it's like we have such good teachers and it's such a beautiful atmosphere that when I drop my kids off and they're sitting at the feet of these teachers all day being formed in that environment, I just actually want to be called up as a dad and a husband in my own home to build a world like that for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been part of the appeal for homeschool families.
So Oakhill is both extension and aspiration.
For
it's
me
kind of both. Yeah. I never thought about that aspiration part. It's true though. Families from homeschooling, they come sometimes in the beginning. They were homeschooling early, and sometimes people find it tough. Sometimes people get through, like we have one family joining this year in high school. the mom's homeschool for 10 years.
Yeah.
And some younger siblings, but then it's like, okay, at a certain point, I feel like I've given what I can. Every parent's a little bit different on that limit. And another thing is, I think sometimes parents, they don't want to do it alone. They're looking for a community. So some people find co-ops or a group, and some people just say, you know what, I really love what I'm seeing at the Oakhill community. I want to be part of that.
Yep.
So I think homeschooling is a great option. I think it's terrific. And then I think parents just need to know themselves and their own situation.
Right. No, that makes sense. Critical thinking, I think we touched on this a bit earlier. I sense that that's a big part of the classical model, is to really, engage in the lifelong learning. Any education, I suppose, is supposed to do that, but I sense a real emphasis in the way you guys talk about classical education. So can you point to some specifics on how the Christian classical model encourages critical thinking and really drives that home for the students, and perhaps maybe touch on the trivium as well, and just kind of, because I think we just touched on that earlier, we didn't really explain exactly fully what that is. Yeah.
I can give an example of, my kids are in grade 7.
Yep.
So they're in the kind of logic school or that middle school phase. So yeah, just to your first point, the trivium.
Yep.
So those are the trivium is sort of a Latin term for the 3 ways or 3 roads. And there's considered, of the 7 liberal arts, these are the language arts.
Yep. So
the other 4, the quadrivium, would be the sort of numerical arts, where you have mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. So I'm not going to talk about astronomy because I don't believe we teach that. Do we? Not yet?
That's another question.
Go look at the stars, kids.
Okay, so let's
stay to critical thinking.
Stay focused. Okay, so the 3 ways of language arts is grammar, or basically the building blocks.
Yep.
Right, when you and I were in class.
Memorization.
Yeah, what are the parts of speech and how they, like, that's technically grammar for language. Dorothy Sayers says that the grammar phase is actually the building blocks of all knowledge.
Yep.
So to do something, there's actually component parts you have to learn first.
Yep.
And then you start to synthesize them. That's when you get to logic.
Yep.
So the logic phase is actually how these pieces start to work together. When it comes to language and ideas, it's you take this information that you now have, but you learn how to structure them into sentences that are true. So you actually learn a bit of the art of logic. Like, what is a true proposition, what's not? What are logical fallacies? And my kids love to kind of play this at dinner time when I'm telling them to do something. And it's like, that's a red herring, or that's like, they'll point out the fallacy. So you're teaching them to kind of listen, or even watch when they're reading.
Yep.
How is the argument made?
Yep.
Right? What is the premise? Is it a major premise? Is it a minor premise? How do those relate to each other? And are there weak points in that argument? And then the rhetoric, which is like the last phase of the trivium, is what we think about when we think about persuasive speech.
Yeah.
So whether that's writing or speaking, now that you know how to make a true argument, it's nothing if it's just in your head. It has to actually be spoken into community. And the job of the good person speaking well is, whether you're in a church council, a board, your family dinner table, can you convince people of the truth, right, by how you speak? Can you actually be someone who has a kind of public persona? So education is still not just for your own kind of selfish benefit. It's supposed to be speaking into community.
I think too, it's like Dorothy Sayers in that essay, The Lost Tools of Learning. It's a pretty fiery opening. If you just read the first couple of pages, and that's good enough to think about for a little while. But she points out like how few people can think these days, even whether they're writing a newspaper, a journalist, someone at a board meeting, not our board meetings. but she has so many good examples, and then you're like, yeah, like people really don't know how to think well. So that's for a lot of people, like kind of the gateway that leads them, a gate that leads them into this. And I think it is, I've led Bible studies and been part of adult Bible studies, and it's actually interesting. I think, so one school in Florida, the Geneva School, I think my understanding of the story was that R.C. Sproul was touring around doing, with Legionnaire Ministries, doing adult discipleship, right? And they said, man, some of these adults, they're hard to work with. Like, they don't know how to read for meaning, or they don't know how to think. Like, we got to go upstream, start educating the future of the church when they're real young, not starting when it's too late. They're already adults.
Yeah.
So that's often, it's like one thing that gets people thinking about it. But I think, and how do we do that? I think there's a number of things. Like Augustine has a really interesting section in his book, the Doctrina, was it on Christian Learning?
Christian teacher.
Yeah. He's like, should a preacher learn rhetoric, like the arts of rhetoric, like all the forms? And he basically says, like, if you're younger and you have time, sure, it's probably helpful. If you're older like me and that time's passed, you probably don't have the time, or you have other things that are more important to learn. But he says something very interesting. He goes, you can learn it though by listening to good preaching. Just listen to really good preaching. You might not know how to like name all of the tricks, but you'll absorb what good speaking looks like, good arguing, good biblical exposition. So I think that's one way that an overlooked way that we form people, or people are formed by what they read. So good books. So they're often learning to think and speak just because of the things they're asked to do in a day, right? We write compositions. They stand up and say it aloud in class. And they're reciting their poetry. We're putting lots of good language, good structures and patterns of language in their mind, beautiful patterns. And so it becomes part of, like, you might say, the storehouse of material. So when they go to think, they have these patterns. Yeah. And then at a certain point, we do teach them to think explicitly, okay, separate the claim from the evidence and from the reason they're giving, right? So sometimes you can just listen to someone speaking, like they're just making claim after claim. They're not supporting it with reasons or backing it up. Because we also don't want our students to be like duped. That's kind of what she says in her essay too, is like, we want to send, we've taught our students to read, good, but now they're at the mercy of the word. And if they don't know how to fling them back, they're going to be, at people's mercy and be victims of other people's language. Yep. So let's teach them how to use language on the offense as well. And that's, I think, that's what we try to do anyways, or just prepare them for. And it's a lot of fun, and it's beautiful, and they love it. They have fun. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you got to be careful, like they don't become just so clever and going around and like, but at the end of the day too, I would say it's not even just critical thinking. It's like a deep thinking. It's also like a charitable thinking. Sometimes there's too much critical thinking. There's not enough charity and assuming the best of the author you're reading. Like you would hope they would assume the best of you. Yeah. So we also try to like teach that charitable listening and that charitable thinking.
I like that. Yeah.
It's a Christian virtue, right, of love.
Totally. Yeah.
I would say too, to that point of, so one of the biggest problems today, and like Orwell called this already in like the middle of the 20th century, is we're just so used to using like tired language, old cliches. And it's like when you settle for that, you let other people do your thinking for you. Yeah. Right. So even in your writing, it's like, don't just accept the ready-made phrase, because that's loaded with all kinds of assumptions. Yeah. And I think in the world of AI, it's even more dangerous. Right. We're letting the algorithms think for us. Right. So it's like, well, and it's like those prompts are not neutral. They're not just giving you like value free information. So part of thinking critically is it's actually a creative enterprise. It is. Right? It actually requires you to use fresh language. Yep. And it's really, really challenging. Because I do think the world is going to be sort of divided into those who will think for themselves and write for themselves, and those who will let those people think and write for them.
I think you're right. Like a concrete example was Jesse, well, you nicely sent over all these thoughts using AI. So I go to look at this outline, and I was like, okay, let me put this together. Oh, look at this link. Oh, wow, he's got all this great stuff. This is pretty good. Maybe I'll just use it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, yeah, this is not quite what I want to ask, right? Yeah. And I just had to put it all together the hard way. But
for clarity, it's just a digital assistant. It's a launch pad.
It was a launch pad, which is what you posed it as, which is, yes, we're not.
This is a gotcha podcast.
It is a gotcha podcast, yeah. Principally, AI. Classical. I don't know about that. Well, yeah. That's funny. Well, okay, Doug, I just want to ask you, though, what, because I would say I still came out as a critical thinker with my Reformed education, right? And you would agree with that as well for yourself?
Yeah.
Like, was there still an element that's missing there that, like, just for the sake of, like, learning and helping, if there is something missing, I want to help our schools improve as well, right? So,
interesting.
Is there anything there? I don't know. Is there a concrete something that we can pull from what classical is doing well that Reformed schools can also integrate? Or is it just kind of more of an overall, you need to kind of have the whole system for it to work?
Or do you think that the Reformed, like I didn't grow up in that church or that family or school, would you say they're doing kind of like, almost like what Augustine was saying, like lots of good examples, good teachers, good preaching, good parenting, kind of immerses you in that environment where you have to stand by your words. You have to kind of give good reasons and evidence. So, but maybe it wasn't explicitly taught.
That's sort of my sense, because I don't even want to say like there's like a Reformed school that's homogenous, because
well, that's
even
fair. I'm using
if you go
it as
across that you are, but Because you did CanRef, Canadian Reformed.
Yeah, I went to Guido, and then I was in Smithville. And
yeah,
John
and
Calvin.
I teach again at Redeemer right now, and there's a lot of Guido students that come, and they're actually really remarkable students in terms of how they think. They're actually well catechized.
Yep.
So there's like, and I do think that part of that is a formation that happens in church, that happens in like post-church discussion.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's actually part of the whole community. It's like talking is actually like a kind of spectator sport that you grow up into. Yeah. And I didn't realize how unique even that was, even among certain kind of Christian communities, where the things that you're not supposed to talk about, like church and politics, that's all we talk about.
That's literally all we talk about.
Yeah. So that's why like I think I was actually formed more around the dinner table with my dad and post-church discussions with like my parents and their friends. And we just kind of listened in and you kind of absorbed it. Yeah. It's a good question though. I think one piece of the puzzle that is maybe missing from the more traditional Christian schools is that kind of Socratic method of actually being taught how to ask good questions. And I actually think this is even a problem. I was reading today a forum in the classical ed movement about writing essay prompts that are actually guiding the student to think a certain way. So there's a question about Marx's Communist Manifesto that basically all the assumptions were communism is absolutely wrong. And it's like, if the student's going to get there, sure, but don't just give them the answer to how to think about this. It's like, let them actually read that source for themselves and let them learn that, again, what Hicks says, the spirit of inquiry. Learn how to inquire into it. And I think that's the kind of risk of a good education. And especially I think Christians have a hard time kind of releasing some of those reins, is you have to let people ask hard questions and trust that the faith is durable enough to withstand it or your argument. And if it's not, are you willing to change your mind?
That's perfect. That's like the ethos of this podcast. Okay, cool. We got a few more I wanted to get to. I guess the one question that parents, if they're listening to this, might be thinking is, okay, so say you have a family of 4 kids or whatever. 2 of our kids are academically inclined. They would love this kind of thing. But 2 of them are less so academically inclined and have other interests and skills. Is classical education a good fit for kids like that who have trouble in typical classroom settings for learning?
Good question for you, Dad.
I would assume you get that question off and on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think so there is a perception that classical education is for like smart kids, or I would say, like, if we're just talking, it's for normal kids who want a human education or a human experience. I think different schools all have their own bandwidths, the kind of students they can accommodate, their own culture, how they're interpreting and living out their vision. So that's I would say more about like at the school level how it's functioning, rather than like, is it a classical Christian problem? I think we're made in the image of God. That means we're language, we talk, we think, we love, we feel, we hurt, we love story, we have a body. I think all those things are addressed by, what we're trying to do when we disciple our young people and the education we provide. I think the emphases change, or the pace might change. There's a couple of beautiful books out there. One's called Simply Classical. I think Cheryl Loeb, I think. So she adopted, their Catholic family, they adopted 2 very special needs children, like schizophrenia, movement problems, different things like this. Anyways, their Catholic priest pushed them, like, these kids need a Christian education. At the same time, their doctor was saying, your kids might speak a few words by the time they're older. And she tells a story at the beginning where their daughter's laughing at something in the Lord of the Rings, that she's reading in the waiting room, in the doctor's office, and she's saying, like, her book is half a story of her family, how they lived it out with very special needs children, and half apology for why classical education is the best for every child and any child. You just have to adapt maybe the pace or things like that. So that's kind of what I would say. And I think sometimes we have our own baggage in modern schools that we kind of bring in, like what we think school should look like and how much sitting should be, and how much do we think about the body, or is it all about the mind and the worksheet? So I think that's a separate problem that we got to think through. And we think about, okay, this is a grade 7 boy in my class. This is not just some like generic human being that I'm. So then a good teacher and a good school's administrator board, like, they will all think through and support what's the best education, and how do we go with the grain of the student at the present stage of life they're in, right?
I would just add to that too. I think one of the things I've noticed too, exactly, it's not like there's just a bunch of geniuses in classical and we're all just reciting Latin chants all day. If only that were the case. No, they're humans. They're little, like, I mean, my kids are 12, 10, and 8, and they have their own struggles with different subjects.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do love about the classical model, and I think it's in the Reformed schools too at their best, is that the ultimate responsibility of education is actually not the schools.
Yep.
And I love that we really put an emphasis on that. It's like, it is mom and dad. So when your kid is struggling with this, it's not just like, what does little Johnny or Susie have to do? It's, what are dad and mom doing with you, with them after school to help? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there's an emphasis that struggle is actually, it's up to the parents to be helping and working alongside the teachers as well.
It might be fair to say too that there's like hundreds of classical schools now, and they all have different academic standards and standards of rigor and work. And so it may be that some schools, I think it can be definitely temptation for the movement to like have too high a standard or too high a bar. I know we do our best to accommodate lots of different learning or academic support. We've created a whole bunch of different structures and positions to support that. I think we've more than a young school might be expected to. So I'm pretty thankful for that. But it is like, it can be definitely a challenge. Yeah. I think each school and family needs to wrestle with who are they really for, and then how do they bring in the support and structure when you don't have that, especially if you serve more and more families. Like, just statistically, you're going to get more and more variance in the kind of learner and the kind of challenge they'll have. And I think as Christians, it's our responsibility to do as much as we can, and at the other end of the day, to just rest in like, we have to recognize our own limits as people too, or as an institution, and we don't, it's too much to think we have to solve every problem.
Right. Is the grading system the same in terms of like probably grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, etc., but also in terms of like A, B's, and C's, that kind of thing? Like, if kids were to come to Oakhill, for example, from a different school, is like grade 3 in, well, let's take a public school. Is grade 3 in the public school the same thing as grade 3 at Oakhill, or is there a difference there? And then maybe also touch on this idea of mastery, because I kind of want to understand what that means for you guys as well.
Yeah, I think it's like grade 3 in terms of age is the same at our school. Yeah. In terms of the standard of what they're learning different things. Sometimes it's a little bit above standard. And sometimes it's just different things. Like, they don't learn poetry, I think, that's the same extent, for example. I think there's that to say. I think then some students, when they come in, like in the most Christian schools and the public school study, they'll just go through and be on an IEP if they are not keeping up with the grade rate, but they'll stay in their age grade, where we place what's best for your learning. Where are you going to love learning? That's kind of one of the heartbeats of Oakhill. We want students to love learning. So if you're in your age grade, but it's so difficult for you, then you're not going to enjoy it or love it. You're going to think you're dumb and other things. So we try to place best based on where a student fits, and sometimes not an easy case. So we're very accommodating and showing families how they can kind of prepare to be in their age grade or wherever. But that's one question. I actually think grading is probably part of the problem too. Like, it's something where just the system we're in. I've heard other models where it's more competency based. You're in like a group of students for like a couple of years, and you self-advocate when you're ready to advance the next level, and you talk to your teacher and they do that. That's a whole different kind of model of like their curriculum and everything, what they're doing, but it's very interesting. I think another model, they had like every student had their own chart, 8 areas of learning. They're at different grades in each area, and they kind of have a teacher and some independent learning, and then when they're ready, they go to the next level. They show that they're competent. Yeah. That's another one that kind of interestingly shows the students the course they're running and might be motivating for some students. But I do think grading is sometimes part of, like, the way we separate students into grades is sometimes can be part of the problem, but it also works as well, so just why we do it. So it's hard. We don't. And then
there's no. We don't do A's, B's, and C's though at Oakhill. I'm trying to think what those letters are. I just looked at my kids' report cards multiple times.
I'm listening to the Oakhill parent who's like, yeah, but you have these other 4 letters that are basically ABC.
Well, kids are gonna translate. It's like you can say I'm a 1, 2, 3, 4, or I'm a dog, cat, mouse. They know what you
whatever that means.
Yeah. But what I do think I enjoy about our assessment and like that idea of assessment is just like draw near to the student and like, can you gauge like did they accomplish this? Is that like they're excited to get what we would say is a C or average or competent. What do we call that again?
Call it right now it's proficient P.
Proficient P. There we go. So proficient is like you met the level.
Provincial standard.
And then it's kind of but that to them is like it's a real accomplishment.
Okay.
And if they get an E, and it's like and I know my kids like some of them are really good at nature study or really good at history. If they get that E, it's like because they're like exceptional in that, and they kind of know it's like they went kind of above and beyond. Where most of the class is at. But I actually do kind of like that culture because, again, grades can actually really malform you and how you think about learning. Yeah. Because learning should be a delight in itself. Yeah. I think like, did Augusta never get a report card? Right?
No,
like,
probably not.
So there's like that, and I think we're trying to, as best as we can, create that kind of environment where the students are like, okay, I'm learning, but the learning is the delightful thing. Not this little letter that comes at the end of it.
Yeah, and it's less rush probably too, I'm guessing. Like I remember growing up, there was always a push for like, okay, we're at the end of the school year, or like the end of the term, like cram all this stuff in. Like how do you guys deal with that challenge? Is there a different way of dealing with that?
Yeah, I think teachers in any school, that's always a pressure that some teachers feel more than others, like the rush to cover the content or finish it. I think you'll get that anywhere. Yeah, it takes sometimes some coaching, or sometimes we have a curriculum team. I was actually surprised to know that a lot of schools, they leave the curriculum up to the teachers. Like here's a standard, make sure you cover these things, then go create it. But we want to like have an integrated vision. So we have a team that researches and helps to design what that curriculum path looks like for students. And it's dynamic too. We're always talking with the teachers, making sure it works and updating it so it's the best it can be.
I would say too, ask us in 5 years when our high schools, because I think that's the thing where it gets a little bit more challenging, is that the quantifying of assessment. In a way, like I hope we never lose that, but whenever at Carter's we have this line, like if something's worth doing, it's worth measuring. Yep. Which I don't agree with, because I mean there's lots of things that are worth doing that are not worth measuring, like painting a picture or so. I think education is one of those things too. You can quantify and assess it, and I think that's why the push is. When I taught even at a Christian school, and you're getting inspected by the ministry, it's well, how many assessments of learning and for learning and as learning have you done? There should be at least this amount per, right? Because that is kind of the paper trail of competency for that student. But again, that can start to be like a tail wagging the dog, that you start to teach to just have the assessment, and you lose that kind of wisdom and humanity that knows your students and where they're at. Yeah,
the love of learning, and yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier, we were talking about parents being like the ultimate responsibility being with the parents in terms of their kids' education. So I would imagine that probably many, at least some of the parents of kids at Oakhill didn't get a classical Christian education because that wasn't most probably, because it wasn't
almost all
option. So what,
ourselves included.
Right. So what should parents expect in terms of supporting their children in an educational experience that they largely didn't get?
What should they expect?
Yeah, like how is
like what is the expectations on them, or what do they expect to get when they come to Oakhill?
Well, yeah, like is it a challenge to help support your kids in an education you didn't get? Like,
I'll say this is someone who's like, I've got a lot of education behind my belt, and I teach. Yeah. And I still feel sort of insecure when my kids come home and they're like quoting their Latin, or they, I should say feel insecure, but I'm grateful that they're getting this. Yeah. And I think the challenge is you're trying to give your kids something that you didn't have. Yeah. So especially when they're like, well, I find Latin really challenging, and you don't speak Latin, and you're a well-functioning adult. Like, why do I have to do this? So there's being able to know how to answer them on that front. The other thing, though, is like we have this weird idea that learning is this like 5-year-old to 18-year-old, and if you're really special, you might do it to 22-year-old, and if you're like borderline crazy, you'll do it to like 27 years old. It's like learning is like a lifelong pursuit. There's all different kinds of ways of learning, right? There's hands-on learning, there's book learning, there's formal education learning. But I think if we can help communicate to the parents that you actually are in a privileged position of learning with your kids, and if you feel like you've missed out on a lot of these books, which I constantly do, hey, you get a chance to actually learn it with them at the dinner table or after dinner, before bed. It's a really beautiful thing to learn with your kids, and it shows like we're all just scratching the surface of our ignorance, right? So, and for kids to see that, hey, like I'm at 40 years old and I'm still always amazed by the amount of things I don't know. And I think that's a kind of wonder-filled disposition to the world. Like, you can be 1,000 years old and God has made this place so mysterious. You're going to keep on learning. So there, I think that's the kind of community we want to create. Is that we're all doing this together.
We're all learning. Do you guys have any resources, or do people ever ask you, like as adults or like the parents, be like, hey, can I come learn this? Or like, you're not going to go sit in the classroom necessarily, but I would guess maybe there's a bit of a desire for that as well.
Yeah, well, they can sit in the classroom. We have a pretty open doors policy.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes our teachers, but I don't like it as much, but I'm like, we got to used to it, guys. It's good. In terms of books, there's kind of like two streams. There's like, you can read books about classical Christian education. That's fine to a level. Or you can actually read the books that students are reading. So we published last year, and we're sharing the book list with our parents, and we're encouraging, read along the books that your kids are reading. It's even an audiobook. Like, I've tried to keep up with my 2 oldest kids this year with the novel studies and read alouds. 90% of it was through Audible, because it's the only way I can get that many books in. They read a lot. And it's great, actually. I have like a shared language, almost an imagination. I can talk about them. So it's been really beautiful and fun asking them their opinion, if they like this certain part of the book. It's just like such a good deepening life and friendship with your kids.
I would say that too, like that idea of like shared culture is like, you can't say we're transmitting a way of life to the next generation if you don't share it kind of with them. And I think that's one of the things we've missed with like modern education is there's almost no cultural touchstones now besides like fleeting Instagram posts or maybe a film. But it's like, if there's these texts that actually really did mean something for Western culture and tradition, and you want your kids to know it, I mean, it really helps that you know it too, and you can share it with them.
100%. Well, gents, we've covered a lot of ground here. This has been fun. Is there anything that you want people to know about classical education that you feel like we didn't cover? Any closing thoughts that way?
I think that it's such a beautiful thing, and I think one of the things that I've tried to like push against are some of the caricatures, and we've kind of addressed some of those tonight. Like, it's elitist, or it's maybe pretentious, or and you can only argue so much. I think the best thing is sort of come and see, and I'd say, hey, we're located in Copetown, Ontario. There's classical school maybe nearby you somewhere. Drop in and check it out. Charlotte Mason, who we didn't talk a lot about tonight, but she's influenced us a lot. She kind of defines education as an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And I think it's like the atmosphere is the part of the education that's not just the classroom learning. It's the hallways, it's the lunchrooms, it's the recess and the playgrounds, it's the weekends. And it's that part of the education that's so much more formative, because it's the form of life our kids are inhabiting. So if you're curious, I'd say the best way to know it is not just to read about it or listen to a podcast, but come for a visit. Talk to Jesse and let him walk you around.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd say that. I'd say if you're a teacher, like, usually teachers enjoy learning, and I think a good teacher who's trying to be a good teacher, if they're not aware of classical education, Christian, it's a weird term to think about it, but just think of like you're standing in the room with histories, most thoughtful people, educators who maybe don't all agree with each other, and that's okay. But I'd say there's just lots of deep resources and help in broadening the horizon of who you invite into what shapes how you think about school and learning and teaching. And I would say, secondly, just come and see. And also just be gracious with whatever classical school you visit, including us. We're all trying our best, and, short-staffed and little budgets and stuff like that, and lots of grace and great parents. Yeah, I think one last thing I think is that sometimes we hear the word classical and we think of something old, or just like teaching like future historians, museum tour guides, and Latin teachers, right? And that's
Should be great.
yeah, but actually we did an exercise with both prospective parents and teachers about learning like these kind of 15 tools you can get from like the Trivium, and how you learn them in any job you're learning, whether you're a baker, a banker, mechanic. Like, you're going to learn the questions you learn to ask. They're relevant for anything you're going into. That's why like they're like tools of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say like it's not just about like the past. It's not like it's misconceived or we're obsessed with the past. It's like, no, they've thought about and wrestled with very human things, perennial things that keep coming up. And so let's wrestle with them, because we have our own issues to deal with today, the church, the world, like, and we just might find some help for really living faithfully in our present. Was Acts say that David served his generation faithfully? And that's kind of what we hope for our children. That's what we're trying to do as parents and others, right? However imperfectly, but with lots of grace from the Lord. I think we really want to disciple our kids to live God's calling well in the present and in the world that's coming. And so that's what I hope people get and understand that it's about.
That's awesome. Beautiful. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys making the time to come out and talk with me about this and our listeners. And it's really cool learning about a new, well, it's not new, I guess, in many ways, but new to me at least in terms of a form of education. And it's cool to compare and contrast it against different options that are out there in terms of the reform schools that I kind of grew up in myself, and homeschooling options as well. And I hope our listeners enjoyed this. And if you're still listening at this point in the podcast, congrats to you. Not many people make it to the very, very end, statistically speaking. But thank you for listening. And send in any questions or concerns, and we'll be happy to address them another time. So without any more further ado, this has been Real Talk.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. In partnership with Reform Perspective, this show is created and produced by Tyler Vanderwood, Lucas Holtfleur, and Mariah Tamiga. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch the show. If you have any feedback for us or ideas for future guests or topics, please let us know. You can reach us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. Be sure to also follow us on social media. You can search Reformed Real Talk on any of the platforms. We should come right up. Also, leave us a review, preferably a 5-star run, on any of the podcast platforms. That would be greatly appreciated. That's all for now, folks. Keep having real talk.